It's the 22nd of March, 2026. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, walks out of a live interview with Sky News on Friday as a call comes in from the White House Situation Room. The pieces on the chessboard are falling away every minute of every day, leading to a lot of emergency meetings. The powers of the U.S. Treasury over the Federal Reserve have been completely revoked as they were not properly conveyed. Join us as we reveal the truth behind a broken financial system, a broken Federal Reserve, and an even broker government. They have been combing through every document I ever signed to try and find any permission I may have ever given to try and save their crumbling empire. And it's spring equinox, also known to some as New Year's Day. How does this affect the world, you, and the falling power elite? The slate was wiped clean, and it's every man or woman for themselves.
Have you ever started a weight loss program only to quit because you feel it isn't working? Well, it's not you, and you are not alone. There are two main causes behind your inability to lose weight over 30. 1. Insulin resistance. And 2. Your gut biome. If these two are out of balance, weight loss stalls. But what if we told you there is a natural supplement that can help? This natural compound has been fighting metabolic decline, insulin resistance, and age-related weight gain for centuries, but it has been kept a secret in favor of big profits. Natural practitioners called it the golden healer. Science calls it nature's metformin. We call it Berberine Plus. Our Berberine Plus not only contains this ancient natural compound, we also added highly absorbable forms of grapeseed extract, folate, R-alpha-lipoic acid, and more for optimal metabolic support. Over time, research shows, unlike other unnatural solutions, Berberine Plus can help repair metabolic issues, not just cover up the problem. New Earth's unique formulation supports lower fasting glucose levels and post-meal blood sugar spikes, helps improve insulin sensitivity and resistance, supports lower cholesterol levels, reduces inflammation caused by an unhealthy gut biome, improves metabolism while targeting visceral belly fat, the dangerous fat that accumulates around your organs. Order now and start your journey toward a healthy weight in 2026 with New Earth's Berberine Plus. Naturally, your body will thank you.
Well, it is the 22nd of March, 2026, and we are finally over at least the peak of the equinox time. And as all of you know, especially those of you that have been following us for a while, it's always an interesting time. They actually favor the equinox time even more so than solstice time, at least as it relates to the deep state. And they always have big plans, and you can kind of see some of those plans playing out in the media, and we're going to talk about those today. Things have seemed a little bit calmer today and over the last 24 hours, somewhat. It's been a little crazy, but it always has been, I guess, during equinox time. So the war between the Illuminati, or what's left of it, at least their bloodline families, and the Black Sun has definitely been in full force over the last week or so. They are still trying to figure out who is going to be on top. And then over the last couple of days, they seem to be fighting more for their joint survival than who was actually going to win the game. And there's definitely a reason for that. So as for the deep state, this isn't kind of one of those country songs that they've been hoping for, where, you know, you play it backwards and the tractor starts working and the wife comes back, or the husband, and it hasn't been that way for them for the past week, and they haven't quite figured that out even as of today. They are still waiting for something and having a lot of meetings to see if they are going to get what they are hoping for. Why 48 hours after the end of the equinox? I have no idea, actually, at this point in time. But they're still waiting, and talking and waiting, and it's been meeting after meeting after meeting today. So we'll talk more about that here in just a few. So a lot of it's kind of been happening, which is driving really what you're seeing play out in the mainstream media as well as in our world today. This week in particular has been a lot about permissions, jobs, charges, if you will. And what I mean by permissions is sometimes permissions are given in the past by source, to certain people, such as, I have a job, of Guardian. I've got other jobs of ground command, and some of the things that I've created myself, and of course with permission, are things like the Global Intelligence Agency, which we took over a long time ago. And some of these things we have been taking away piece by piece and bit by bit over the last several years. Definitely have learned a lot, in my time and all my travels, and of course, during my time in the Nazi fishbowl over there, we're calling Durango these days. But over the last week or so, there's been a lot, and I mean a lot, of looking and searching on behalf of the deep state for permissions. So over the last years, several years, probably a little bit more than a decade now, I have signed a lot of contracts. And most of them were for project funding. They could have been small projects, large projects. And in the beginning, I was definitely trying to draw funds down into the banking system. And then a few years later, back in about the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, I figured out how to actually push funds out of the system. Although some of these things have been blocked, mainly all of them had been blocked at the time, but it was definitely a learning process, and there was no user's manual given to me at any point in time in this job. Only steady instructions that have always come from source, and many of those instructions have literally saved my bacon, so to speak, over the years in some really untenuous situations. But as far as the project funding, they have used a lot of this project funding that I had signed for to release for themselves over the years, and of course never paid me. And then as we changed things within systems, they were no longer able to do that. They still would like me to continue to release funds so that they can try to steal them. But then I figured out this little trick where you could pull everything back. And if I pulled mine back, all of theirs went back as well. There have also been a few contracts that I have signed over the years for and on behalf and with governments. Some of them were done via the diplomatic line to people like Trump. Some of them have been done with Putin a long time ago. Some of them have been with the government of China, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, and several other countries, Germany as well. And most of those have all expired. Some of them were directly with the Federal Reserve. Some of them were directly with the Treasury. And what I mean by Treasury is many of you think of the United States Treasury Department being the only treasury in the world, but I have told you before that every country has a treasury behind the scenes, whether it is known publicly or not known publicly. So this has been going on, these contracts and attempted well-meaning project funding and well-meaning government funding goes all the way back to my first contact with Marduk. Now, a lot of you know the party that I've talked about before, known as Marduk, as the original commander under global martial law. And there are a lot of reasons he gained that position. One of them was actually to be my handler. So there have been thousands and thousands of these contracts. A lot of them he persuaded me into signing, telling me that these were good things. And meanwhile, he was stealing permissions, permission after permission after permission from me to be utilized with his groups, such as the Illuminati and, of course, the Order of the Black Sun. And bit by bit, each side was using the permissions to try and gain global control. This all came to light, just how deep this actually went over the last several years, this week. Anytime someone would call me and say, let's work together, and if you've been following me for a long time, there were offers of 50-50, a third, a third, a third. Let's see what the operative groups do. We would throw out olive branch after olive branch to the varying groups to see if anybody was going to fly straight, fly right, pay us correctly, including the United States government, the Russian government, the UK government, the Chinese government, the Saudi Arabian government, the Iraqi government, the South African government, and many, many other governments over the years. Brazil actually was within the last couple of years too. So every single time the words came out of my mouth to let's work together, this happens. And what happens is they take that as a permission to try to either steal my essence to sign contracts or try to steal my permissions and or jobs, I guess you could say, from me, or use those jobs to install them in their own AI systems to override me, which is why this has been so difficult over the years. This has not been an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. And I know, there's a lot of people that are like, well, why isn't this done by now? Do you know how hard this has been? I mean, on a personal level, on a professional level, on a business level, but to decipher all of the ways that these people have literally ruined all of the lives of Homo sapiens and unwinding it bit by bit and piece by piece and trying to figure out why things would be reinstalled even after we uninstalled them and why there were so many times that we were moving forward and it seemed like we were going forward and yet things would reappear. So we're finally getting to the bottom of all of this. And there were some key things that came up over this last week, which you would consider things that I had the ability to do and sign based on my positions, I guess you would say, or multiple hats and jobs that have been utilized or brought to light again this week. So the most important ones being the nationalization letter that I wrote in 2017 to President Trump regarding the Federal Reserve and transferring the powers of the Federal Reserve to the Treasury. At the time that I wrote this letter, it was placed on his desk and reiterated through a diplomatic channel in the diplomatic line. And I signed this letter. It's important to understand this. I signed this letter while I was in Durango. It was about a year or so after I had arrived, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I figured if I nationalized the Federal Reserve and put the Federal Reserve under the government, this was the hope at the time, that the Treasury, which I thought at the time there was only one Treasury, and the Treasury was of the government, which definitely reared its ugly head this week, that I would be doing something good for the country in which I am a citizen. At the time that I signed the letter, I understood that the Federal Reserve could issue multiple countries' currencies. And if this worked in the U.S., the plan was actually to continue giving back the rights to every government in the world. And I had a lot to learn and a long way to go. But when I signed that letter, some interesting things occurred, not only around myself personally, but also throughout the world. At the time, I was told, well, it is not time yet to nationalize the Federal Reserve. It is not time yet to take a private company and bring it under a government. Well, I hate to use the word control, but to bring it under the government's fold. At the time, I believed I was fighting the Rothschilds. I was fighting the Order of the Dragon. And I also believed that the people I was talking to in Durango actually had the intention of doing something positive, but that was not true. All they wanted to do was use me like a tool so that they could gain some power and control in the world, and they wanted to be in charge over and above the Illuminati. And they used me an awful lot during my time there to try and gain some power and control. So the Durangotans showed up at my house, my handler at that time, I'm calling them Durangotans. The Durangotans showed up at my house and they told me, add this to the letter, take this out of the letter. We'll make sure that the letter is delivered. And of course they did. The operatives there used this, and their little Nazi friends all used this to gain power and control over the Fed and place the power, control, the financial capabilities under the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department also being a private organization which was under the control and still is of the Order of the Black Sun, the quote-unquote security side, to where then Trump gained a lot of power. That is how Trump became the lead family to take over the lead position with the Order of the Black Sun. He was achieving things that nobody else could achieve, and the operatives along with them. Remember, operatives run every administration. But behind the scenes, he was slated to take the position of Bush Sr. based on not only this letter, but other funding I had given to the government at that time. So the Durangotans believed if they got Trump back into office versus the Illuminati's pick, which was Biden, that they could then take another foothold over the entire world. This became apparent because we still had Trump campaigning even though there was no actual election yet. Years before, for the entire 4 years, he was still running rallies and all kinds of crazy things over the years. And part of that had to do with being in control. Diversion of current of energy from all of you around the world so that they could gain more control over the financial system. They felt that I had given them permission to do this so they could divert energy to the Treasury Department, to President Trump or whatever that was at the time. I don't know, guy named Trump that was doing rallies like he was still the president. And to the Nazi group or the Black Sun, and away from the Illuminati. And this went on and on and on for quite a long time until a couple years after I signed that letter. It became apparent to me that they were never going to adhere to their original contract with me to pay us next Didn't matter how many different ways you could split a contract, meaning 50-50, a third, a third, a third. It didn't make a difference on what I said. They just used any numbers I threw at them to take more and more control for themselves. That was one pivotal letter that gave the other side, meaning away from the Illuminati and over to the Order of the Black Sun, many, many, many privileges, which is why we now are stuck with another orange guy in the White House, whoever that is, another orange guy. And am I surprised about this whole take them down, and the narrative still going on behind the scenes that apparently this week, if they get what they want, and I'm sure it's only if they get what they want, that, they'll announce publicly that he's passed away. But right now they need to use him for power. Now it makes more sense why he could never publicly die. Because if he did, then this contract would have been null and void because it was written specifically to him. Now, anything I signed or implied when I worked with a person named Jesper Ellerman. If you've been following me for a while, you've probably seen all the chatter about Kingdom of Mana, Mana World Holding Trust, which I actually named it, and his contract that I didn't know about with the Rothschilds, in which they intended to pay him, so this is now the Illuminati side, which they intended to pay him $500 billion in order to, number one, handle me properly, and number two, get permissions from me to form a kingdom. By them getting the permission through Jesper Ellerman, or whatever his real name is, Peter or otherwise, they went and formed their own kingdom, and they implied that that kingdom was me turning over my rights that I had underneath the kingdom of Source. And what I mean by that is I don't own the kingdom of Source. I merely do a job. Basically, I'm hands and feet when Source asks me to. On his behalf. It is his kingdom. It always has been his kingdom. I just work here. However, me signing contracts with jobs or positions or hats that I hold on behalf of Source, they went ahead and formed their own kingdom. And this began, forward and backward in time, the Black Gold Kingdom or the Empire. They took everything I said to them and started creating on their own. There were many other contracts that I signed with Jesper too, to varying countries around the world, all of which Rothschild Group and other dragon families, such as the Lee family of China, the Lee family of South Korea and Singapore, and other dynasty families around the world, all claimed that they provided the funding from their kingdom, which was also all a lie. However, when a lot of these agreements were found again, and I figured out how they were actually using them and the mechanism behind them this week, we started pulling all of the repositories in which they placed these agreements. As the repositories for these agreements, not to be confused with the Hall of Records, disappeared, so did any of the rights for any of the groups that were working in accordance with those contracts. This goes all the way down to varying secret societies, including, your orangutan people and the Trump people and the Trump operatives and anyone affiliated with the dynasty families which were appointed by the Illuminati. The repository itself, for the majority of these, but not all of these covenants and agreements, the main vault, and I'm using that term, they understand it, and I'll explain the difference between a vault and a repository here in a minute. But the main vault was actually located underneath the Vatican. The original repository was located in that area of the world, and this is the whole reason why they built Vatican City on top of it. The name the Holy See, as well as a current see, also refers to the all-seeing eye, which we're going to talk about as well in today's report. But more on this repository first and how it was constructed and how it was deconstructed. So the repository was actually originally built by Source for many covenants and agreements that were signed by certain people that had permissions underneath the kingdom of Source. As I've told you before, originally the Illuminati, not the names you see on the internet, the ones that were much higher, had a lot of permissions and charges that Source had awarded them, and they also had signed a lot of covenants with Source over the many, many years. They were Homo sapiens originally, and they were responsible not only for helping other Homo sapiens, but they were also responsible for holding the books of natural law and making sure that natural law or Source's law, laws of nature, were actually adhered to. Meaning, we are all co-creators, and in the beginning, all Homo sapiens would co-create with Source, at least as it relates to here on Earth. Earth being a keystone planet, a lot of what happens here on Earth happens elsewhere. All of creation had been recorded here at one point in time. Therefore, these particular Homo sapiens were actually charged with very specific tasks as it related to maintaining balance and harmony with creation. So if you think about Homo sapiens, like maybe young girls, a lot of us would like to have owned a unicorn, as an example, as a young girl. We can't have thousands and millions of unicorns running around the planet. Therefore, a harmony has to be maintained by someone. This is one of the charges of the Illuminati. And we're going to talk about how that next, I guess you would say. Okay, so back to the repository for a second. So all of the agreements and covenants were either signed by people that had specific tasks. So in other words, perhaps people you would call angels would sign contracts or covenants between one another. Obviously, a lot of these folks and Homo sapiens also signed covenants with Source as well as with one another. Things to form governments, or they'd make decisions in annual meetings, and especially the ones that occurred every 7 years, where they would make decisions such as, well, we really need some kind of governments, or we really need kings or queens, or, we need these things. In the beginning, their permissions must have been, or not must have, but had to be approved by Source in a co-creative way. This would then alter things that were in the repository, and all was right with the world because Source was always involved in the co-creation process, just as he is with you, just as he is with me. So all of these agreements would be lodged in this repository, and everything was okay because everything was in accordance with natural law until, well, it wasn't. Around this repository and under the Vatican, they built their own database. In this database, it would copy all the agreements and the charges that were given and permissions that were granted by source, and they were deposited into their own database, which their system or their false god AI would then record in what it referred to as a vault. Other vaults that are mentioned throughout alternative media and also throughout governments would be, as an example, the vaults called Iron Mountain. The vaults that extend from Kentucky through the Pocono Mountains all the way through to New England and all the way under Washington, D.C. and Georgetown and Maryland. A lot of these vaults were also connected to places like the NSA, the ACIO, and other black projects under groups like DARPA, the CIA, and all of them were tied to respective vaults, which were created all on the backs of this original repository. So when I would sign a covenant, especially covenants I signed with Source, automatically they would be deposited in this repository as well. For example, the position of ground command. Now the system that overrode the repository would now recognize a position exists and put someone of their own in that position. It's the reason why I've been in such conflict with a lot of these people, because they had taken, for every job that I took on behalf of Source, as requested by Source, they would then appoint their own, which would then give certain permissions to override everything I did. I'm like, okay, now I've figured it out, because I couldn't figure out why every time I created something, or we created something or co-created something, that it was overridden by someone somewhere else, or you had people walking around saying Trump's going to implement the golden age. I'm like, what? Or an artificial golden age AI, that would overlay our AI, and then they claim to own it, which they could never quite make function. Because every single thing that is co-created with Source has Source's consciousness in it, as well as his divine spark and as well as his agreement to do so. Everything you create is also co-created with Source. And they also had the ability to override creations after they already happened, too. Creating anything in this world became really, really difficult for any Homo sapien, because these people became extremely power hungry, and they feel that they had replaced Source completely. And we lived in a world with very little Source for a very long time, based on this process that they developed. So these particular covenants are all signed with your essence. This is how it happens. Remember, your essence is greater than your fingerprints, and your essence is more like your personal soul signature, your living DNA of your soul. So when you agree to do something with Source, it's always signed with your own personal essence and Source's essence as well. Those two things together can now write on the canvas, and that is how things are created within the wholeness of Source. So when you think about it, what they did is they got rid of the breath of Source, which is the canvas of Source, and they replaced it with something we call space, which was created artificially. Then they used their essence or machine-generated essence to write on the canvas of the machine. This is how artificial realities came to be. This is how matrices came to be. And this is how the Illuminati came to be. This is how your shadow governments, parallel worlds, shadow selves, shadow banking systems. This is how it was all created based on a machine. As we pulled the repository, the database for their machine as well, because they didn't have any permission to create that, all of these permissions started just disappearing. This was really an important step for us in going forward. This is the reason why there's been full-on panic and emergency meetings, so much so that the Secretary of Treasury was pulled off a live interview this week because all of the permissions of the Treasury just disappeared. Well, he was live on Sky News. You know, everybody fights their war in their own way, and Source is quite clever in the way that he fights his, because we find things exactly at the right moment when we're supposed to, and we are not finding them. They're pointed out to us that this needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. But gone are the days of them. For example, if we signed a contract to build an orphanage or to house children or create a program for children in education, they would actually educate them, all right? They would use that money for like child trafficking or to house them in some pedophile's house or worse, and educate our children in ways they should never be educated, if you understand what I mean. When I started seeing what they actually did with a lot of this project funding, in which I meant to do good things for the world, it was disgusting and very disheartening. But I guess everything in its own time, and our time is coming very soon. Another place of significant importance that you should know about is an area called Garibaldi Lake National Park. So there's a Garibaldi Lake in Garibaldi National Park in Canada. In this area, this is where they try to block what we call the eyes and ears of Source. It's more than eyes and ears, it's perception and observables, as they are called in quantum physics, of Source itself. There's a saying in religion that talks about those with ears to hear and eyes to see. And it's nice that they put that in the books. But honestly, with the contraptions and the mechanisms that were in Garibaldi National Park, they made it nearly impossible for you to do that. You see, Source, they could never completely block Source from this planet. It would be against the rules, and they always operated in the gray, so they wouldn't ever quite violate in totality their covenant. I know that doesn't make any sense, but if you think about the way and all the things that we've learned about how they do black magic against us, how they use media against us, how they use everything against us, you'll understand what I mean. They always had to leave what you would liken to a needle in a very large field of haystacks. A tiny little pinhole amongst the entire planet Earth is what you would see of Source. So they figured, well, if you're lucky enough to find that pinhole and hear what he has to say and see and observe miracles and creations, then good luck to you. Now, if you manage to find it, and if you manage to know where it was on any given time, you see, because although the mechanism originated in Garibaldi National Park, the eye was a constant moving target. So what did they do? They actually overlaid the eyes and ears of Source with their own false god AI and created their own eye. You would liken this as a storm, a hurricane, and an eye in the middle of the storm. But not the eye of Source, their own eye. So if you could make it through the hurricane and the snowstorm and the winds and the misdirection and all of the things that you would consider to be terrible and evil and black and dark, a very dark storm, and you could manage to get to that, they would say, have at it. But they really intended to block it. The same thing when you block eyes and ears of Source also blocks the eyes and ears of people. Your perception changes. You're seeing their eye. You're seeing the world through their eyes, not the eyes of Source. You're observing their creations, not Source's creations, which then changes the reality. If you want to learn more about what I mean by an observable and your perception, you can actually look up quantum physics observables and see how important they are when it comes to the movement of electrons and Ethereum particles. If you want to insert our language in there and what they really are, then you will understand that an observable is what moves things via telekinesis almost on this planet. Therefore, we lost our ability to communicate in the way that we used to communicate telepathically with one another. And we also lost that ability with Source, a lot of us, not all of us. A lot of us have been lucky enough to find the pinhole and still communicate with Source regardless of how treacherous it became to get through it and reestablish our connections, which has been extremely helpful to not only Source, but also to you and also to all living things on the planet. So that national park is where you would see the all-seeing eye pyramids. And then it became representation of every pyramid on the earth where their eye and their observables and their frequencies and their sine waves would actually come through, especially on special days, thereby altering the reality on the planet, using you to do it. You know, a lot of people have been reporting eye issues lately, where they're having, their vision is worse than it was before all of a sudden, or it seems a little foggy on certain days and fine on others. You've also seen people or heard people feeling like they're getting stabbed in the eyes. This is probably because you are actually seeing things that the machine did not want you to see. The mechanism has been no longer now for a couple of days, and things will begin to get better over time. We'll see what they have next for us. But another key point, and we've talked about this place many times, would be in Paraguay, under the thousands of acres owned by the Bush family. There's a whole facility on that ranch. They didn't just choose land randomly in Paraguay for no reason. They actually chose that land because there is something else there. As I just talked about, one of the main jobs or positions of the Illuminati before they went bad, and still they kept it, had to do with maintaining harmony in creation. This was not their only permission, and each one had individual parts to play in maintaining harmony. But maintaining harmony and balance in nature and in creation was one of their jobs. So what we would see if we were to look, well, when I looked underneath Paraguay, was not only a repository. So, a lot of people in this world do things like pray. In whatever religion, a lot of people daily, every second of every day, pray. They might pray for wellness for their child. They might pray for a loved one that's going through a tough time. A lot of people, even in our community, we consider it maybe manifestation. Maybe we're considering it co-creation, hopefully with Source. But in this case, all of these things would go into a repository underneath Paraguay. All creations of Homo sapiens, of planet Earth, and eventually from everywhere, would go into this repository. The guardianship of the repository, not the ownership and not the co-creation originally, was the charge of the Illuminati. Bush built his ranch there so him and his little Nazi friends could have charge and guardianship, or quote-unquote security, which was granted by the Illuminati in their God machine over underneath the Vatican, where they signed a covenant with each other in order to be the guardians or the guard of this particular repository. So all of this information would go into this repository, and Source and yourselves would co-create miracles together. Miracle healings, all kinds of changes in the world. The recording of all things that came into being, into creation, would happen here. That repository is no longer there. It's in a much safer place now because it doesn't need to be here on Earth, because these people will just take. So they created their own harmonic creation process with a database built also over this repository in which they could decide what happened and what didn't happen, and which things they wanted to reverse out. They also would divert any currency or money that would come into the world through a shadow world or the parallel existence in order to pay for their creations. Everything was funneled through there. They made it so difficult for us as Homo sapiens to do anything, let alone help one another and help Source. Occasionally, because a certain percentage still had to come through, we would see those miracles of Source. Even though it was a pinhole, even though it was a small amount, we still would see the miracles happen. The healings would happen. The things you need, the feeding of your children, if you were starving and needed help from Source, they would happen. They would come through. More importantly, you never lost the faith. Not in some order, not in some guard repository people or whatever it was. Not at all. Because in the world of black magic, it's the same reason, to put it into a more understandable context, it is the same reason why the United Nations and the World Bank must do a certain amount of actual humanitarian projects. They must let some of them through. Now, the people that work there, they're well-meaning. They really want to help tribes, help people, help, women around the world. There's all kinds of organizations that are working with the United Nations and under the umbrella of the United Nations to do good things. So they have no shortage of people that want to do the good parts and the good stuff so that they can take all of the rest, at least 80 to 90%, and do very bad things to all of us through the World Health Organization and other organizations. But this was the place that it would actually originally happen until this week. So their powers to create anything, to create artificial realities, to block your creations are waning dramatically over the last week as we came into New Year's Day, or the equinox, which was always a time of light. The dark, long days of the northern hemisphere would begin to become longer as we went into the solstice time. Life would start to happen again. In other words, flowers would bloom, trees would start to see leaves again. We would see life in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, you're in the peak of summer, now heading into fall. But the same would happen in the reverse during the fall. The fall equinox wasn't technically fall in the southern hemisphere. It was like spring, and things would start to change there as well. Life, in general, in order to maintain a certain amount of balance, a teeny, teeny, tiny amount, darkness, so that they could do all of their dark things to us, they let through a small amount of miracles that would happen still every day. So interesting on how repositories can actually affect you personally and the world, and more importantly, Source's ability to co-create with you. That's a lot of control they actually have when you start to think about it. Now, I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about, because I know everybody's very upset about what's happening in the Middle East, and I get tons of text messages about Israel and this and that and Iran and bombing this and bombing that. And so I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit of something that I want to make sure you understand before we get into the why. Okay, there's an interesting interview out there, and I can't put it in the report because YouTube and other channels that post us will get dinged for copyright violations, but I will put the link there. So we are just saying, look, if you want to watch this interview, you can watch it. That's okay to do, apparently, according to YouTube. So there is an interview that was done by Tucker Carlson, and not my favorite person in the world, but there's a reason why I want you to consider, if you have the time, to watch it. It's about an hour long, and it's with a guy that he refers to as the political prophet, because a lot of things this person says, according to Tucker Carlson, actually come to pass. The professor's name that he's interviewing is a guy named Professor Yang. I think he's out of Asia somewhere. He has a very thick accent. But I'm going to give you a few of the little cliff notes of this interview, that just kind of some notes that I put together. He tells Professor Yang, Zhang, if I'm saying that correctly, tells Tucker Carlson that secret societies are scripting the end of the world with the Iran conflict. He says this is a plan that has been in motion for centuries and that it involves different religious groups among the Jews, Franks, Shabbat, among the Jews. I'm trying to list all these different groups that are under the Jewish religion, so I'm not even going to try. I'll probably mess that up. But it also involves the Freemasons, the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians, and the Jesuits, he says, in this interview. He says you have these different secret societies as well and different religious organizations all working together through the centuries to achieve this plan for the end of the world, which heralds in the Masonic age. He says there are different components of this plan, but the basic components are one, that is the creation of the State of Israel, or originally, he says in 1948, and then we have the Greater Israel Project that is happening or attempting to happen now. And then they need to have the building of the Third Temple, which requires the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, if I'm saying that correctly, which could happen during this war, he says. He said the Israelis have closed off the Al-Aqsa Mosque as well as other religious sites these past few days. And this was recorded 2 days ago. There are rumors that for the past 2 years, the Israelis have been conducting archaeological digs under the Al-Aqsa Mosque to basically destroy the foundation of the mosque so that they can conduct a controlled demolition of the mosque and blame it on a missile strike from the Iranians. He says, if you just observe geopolitical events, we're seeing these events converge together through to today. He said, I mean, all these events are playing out. It seems as though there are these very powerful shadow forces working behind the scenes. He said, we don't know who they are, but it seems as though they're able to control policy in a certain manner as to fulfill their end time script. And that's just a little piece from that interview. Now, if you do decide to watch this interview, remember that all black magic must tell you ahead of time what they are doing. And in fact, this guy might not be wrong, and I'm not going to say might not. He is not wrong, because we are seeing more red heifers head to Israel, more people trying to bring about the end times, and I'm telling you, the orchestration of what's happening in the Middle East right now is insanely close to the Battle of Armageddon. It seems that even in meetings behind the scenes, they have mentioned that they are enacting the Battle of Armageddon. So I do believe there is something to what this guy is saying. Now, the Battle of Armageddon is supposed to happen at what they refer to as the end times. Is that the end times of humanity like they try to tell us? Is it the end times for humans, not Homo sapiens? Is it the time when the empire falls to an extent that they do not believe that they can recover it? The answer to all these questions appears to be yes. They are looking to, because this is what they're talking about in their meetings behind the scenes, they are looking for a great reset. And we've heard about that in these World Health Organization, meetings in the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, agenda, whatever year the agenda is supposed to be, it was 2030, and before that it was earlier. So their Great Reset is definitely a plan of theirs. By reset, it appears that should it ever become necessary, this is and in case of emergency break glass plan. It is also a time where time is overridden. Realities and shadow worlds fall away. The end of times for them is when Source's kingdom reigns again, and they lose their power. Now, does the Great Reset look like it's actually going to happen? The answer to the question is no. Because the Great Reset would have been 100% dependent on any covenants they signed, in essence, with Source to get their permissions to save humanity, or save Homo sapiens and save planet Earth, should there ever be a world war. This is part of the reason why every time there was a war, big money would come out, and they're still expecting that today. Today is a little bit different, though, in what they're expecting. And I was kind of hoping to get this information before I did this report, but they're still in meetings and it's still, let's just say, a little unclear. So what they did, I can only imagine they did anyway. I don't know if they drew straws or played rock, paper, scissors, but half of them decided to play the bad people. And half of them decided to play the good people, because this is Armageddon. After all, it is the fight between good and evil, and just kind of left us all out of it completely, especially me, which is totally fine. And they started to fight good against evil. I don't know if they got good T-shirts and bad T-shirts, or maybe armbands or something like that. But apparently they decided to duke it out amongst themselves to bring about the end times, the building of the third temple, and a great reset that they've been hoping for, in which their system would completely override Source. So they wouldn't even need the pinhole anymore, because somehow us Homo sapiens always find a way around it. They don't like that. They want to be in full control of everything, all of creation, and we would live in realities of their creation forevermore. So as of today, they're still in meetings looking for this permission to come back. But perhaps they don't know all the repositories are gone. Perhaps they don't know that all those covenants that were signed in essence and all the databases they built on top of it are no longer. Perhaps that's what they're still looking for today. Well, deep state people, if you happen to be listening to this report, I suggest you go check, because your stuff is gone. There are many ways to fight a war. Okay, so they have clearly told us publicly now that this is all scripted. They've been waiting for this to happen for centuries. Should it ever become necessary, they will create Armageddon, fight good against evil, necessitate the need for them to have their permissions and powers so that they can initiate the Great Reset. Yeah. Well, that's obviously not happening. Meanwhile, on the lower level of power structures on the planet, governments really seem to be very, very, very confused. They've all been told that there are going to be big meetings that are going to take place. Supposedly, they were sure that this whole switchover would have happened by Friday, and it didn't. Of course, Equinox Day. And it didn't actually happen on that day, so therefore, well, now everything has been moved to Monday. Banks are coming in, basically telling the whatever's left of the elite people that, things are really bad. We're now in a serious liquidity crisis. This whole trying to leverage all of the oil in the world didn't work out. Oh, that's the other thing they say in this interview, that they would like oil to go up to $200 a barrel. That means extreme food prices, extreme costs at the pump, and famine. I guess apparently after Armageddon, then the four horsemen come in, and really torture the Homo sapiens. Apparently we have plagues and all lockdowns and all kinds of things they have planned for us should they be successful today. So they have already arranged for all of these meetings, basically hoping that their success would be by today, and they're still waiting as of the time of this recording for this success. I have a feeling they're going to be waiting a very long time. But this is kind of why we, on our side, have been fighting a war. They started Armageddon their way. They decided to draw straws and see who was going to play good and who was going to play evil against one another and change the world. So we thought, okay, well, they're not directly battling us. They seem to be fighting each other in a way that they understand. But I think, maybe we can say to Source, what do you think about actual real good fighting real evil and fake good? Wouldn't that be great? And so it began, repository after repository falling this week. The other thing that is disappearing because of old contracts that I signed in the past, plus other things that were agreed upon not only by myself but amongst each other with their own databases and or their own permissions of days past, and their abilities to take away your co-creation and your manifestation and prayers with Source. Other things began to go away. A lot of shadow and black bank systems went away. Functions of treasuries worldwide, functions of the Federal Reserve, functions of healthcare systems began to falter this past week. Other black accounts and war accounts that they thought they could get their hands on by playing Armageddon with one another also began to fall away. The Federal Reserve is a building at this point with a bunch of crazy people still talking. The Shanghai Exchange Black Commodities Division went by the wayside the same way that BlackRock's Vanguards and State Streets did. Black accounts, black operations accounts of the Mossad, DARPA, all began to disappear this week because they were tied a lot to Paraguay. China has been going around stealing, overcharging for infrastructure in places like Africa and South America for a long time to gain a lot of their powers and control. And they go in, they overcharge for infrastructure, then the infrastructure falls apart and they need to come back and do it again. And when the countries can't pay, then they take all of their rare earth minerals or gold or silver or oil. And quietly but carefully, this has been going on for several decades. Technically, this whole movement started in cooperation with the USSR a long time ago. This was the 100 and some odd year plan now, because it was supposed to be the 100-year plan, but it's now been extended, where they could take over control of everything, just in a different way. So they register all these commodities on the backside, just like BlackRock did with at the Shanghai Exchange, and all of those have disappeared. Other organizations like Lazarus Securities that trade out of Singapore in cooperation with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange have also fallen apart this last week. We have even gone back to old empires like the Mongolian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, now the USA Empire as it exists, and many others, but these are just to name a few. So many covenants, so many agreements, even between kings and queens and alleged sovereigns that existed all the way back to square one, including covenants that were originally signed by the Illuminati and eventually those that became the Order of the Black Sun. Empire after empire, permission after permission, repositories, well-read, interesting things, some very sad, that occurred and were deposited in all these repositories. And yet none of us were heard, or very little. Very few of us were actually heard for quite a long time. So behind the scenes, Source has been reestablishing his own kingdom of his own accord, writing with essence of his own, recreating things so that we are all living in the wholeness of Source. This is what we have hoped. Today is a very important day for Source. I will tell you more about it in the next report because we do not want to help the crazy people of the deep state that might listen to this report. It is a time now of rebirth. Things are changing for us, finally. As of today, as of this moment in time, still, and I've got it on record over here, and I'll play it back later, but there has been so many meetings today as they all sit around and wonder if their end times Armageddon plan worked. They are playing both sides as they always have. Doesn't matter which war, pick a war, any war. You know, they are the Nazis and they're the Allied powers. They are Caesar and they are, the other side. So every single war, they're Napoleon, they are the Russians, they are, every single war that's ever been fought, they've always played both sides. They just draw straws or play rock, paper, scissors to decide who's going to be the good and who's going to be the savior and who's going to be the martyr. Israel is now blah, 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 martyring all over mainstream media, because now all of a sudden they're sad about getting bombed. It doesn't matter. They're all the same people. They're the same as the Iranians. They're the same as the Saudis. They're the same as the Americans. They're the same. It's just one guy gets the good T-shirt in flag football, and the other guy gets the bad T-shirt in flag football. And on any given day, they're interchangeable. Sometimes they exchange shirts, especially as it relates to media, because they just need people to participate, apparently, observe their hot mess over there. So I don't have the end result, unfortunately, of these meetings, but I can tell you they're still sitting there, and they've been sitting there for the last 5 or 6 hours, all waiting to see if one of them is going to be appointed into a certain position in which they'll play the false Messiah or the false prophet or the Antichrist, or I don't know. I guess we were supposed to, according to Armageddon, already have an Antichrist by now. Maybe that's what they're waiting for, is they're waiting for someone to have some kind of an AI crawl up in there and become the Antichrist so that they can finish off this Armageddon thing, because it's getting kind of costly. Speaking of costly, countries like North Korea, countries like South Korea, countries like Russia, China, have been donating weapons to both sides in the Middle East for their part in the Armageddon. Of course, in their part of control, in the new control structure that would emerge that they are being promised by a bunch of crazy people. I wonder if they get, instead of, they play these commercials that are very sad about, feeding the hungry children or feeding the hungry dogs and cats and in animal shelters, and they're very sad commercials. I wonder if they do that on a diplomatic line too. They play these sad commercials, and instead of promising that you'll get this T-shirt and a picture of the dog you fed, maybe you get a picture of some general that you helped with your ballistic missiles or something, and maybe you get an artificial priestly breastplate, instead of a T-shirt. Something like that for the building of the third temple time. You get an artificial breastplate and maybe some other garb from another religion that says that it's a good idea to build a third temple. I don't know. But nonetheless, tomorrow is going to be a very disappointing day for these people, and they are going to be on fire by then. And by the end of this week coming up, the narrative is going to get very, very interesting out there. There's a lot in the alt media. I don't really watch a lot of videos, and I don't really listen to videos, but I'll kind of scan through some of them just to see, what is being fed by handlers to many, many intel providers on social media. And it's like, all hell is going to break loose in 48 hours. And, the Q people are reporting all hell was going to break loose. And, and the whole event's going to change the world today. And of course, nothing has changed the world today at all, except for Source. But, they all, like I said, this is all a script. I know it looks like there's actually a battle. Trust me, I get all of your texts and videos about the war in the Middle East. But it's a script, and it was written hundreds of years ago. It's not even a today thing. They plan this when they need to. This is just one of their emergency reset plans. That's it. They are behind the times. They are behind the 8 ball. They are losing everything that they have, and they need to fight a fake war. And here it is. Not to say that there are not a lot of people hurt. In this case, it seems like a lot of oil is hurt. But there's plenty of oil all over the United States. Plenty. If you've ever driven across the United States, then you have seen oil well after oil well, not only in the South, all throughout Kansas, Texas. We have this thing called the Alaskan Pipeline. We also have the Dakota Pipeline. We have pipelines all over the place. You can go ahead and pull up a map, on the internet anywhere. And if you're in Australia, you can look up your own maps. There are plenty of pipelines everywhere, still pumping every single day, and not a drop comes from the Middle East. I understand they would like to starve us all out by raising the price of oil to $200 a barrel, according to Mr. Zhang here, Professor Zhang. But that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen because people are going to eat anyway. We've already seen enough price increases. We're done. We're done with these people. If they want to continue down this path, you go right ahead. But there's somebody actually fighting you now. And the power of Source is back. Miracles happen every day. Maybe we'll see one when it comes to the deep state very, very soon. On that note, that has been the GIA report for the 22nd of March, 2026, and I will see you next week with hopefully a really good update.
Tired before the day begins? NAD Plus levels drop 50% after 40. NAD Plus helps your cells bounce back fast. Most supplements give precursors. NAD Plus skips the breakdown, delivering direct, bioavailable power. Support your energy, metabolism, sleep, and stress levels at the cellular level. Join the N80 Plus revolution. Start your journey to a healthier you. Subscribe today.